All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the SASB standards to uncover exactly how gas utilities measure and report the real affordability of energy. I mean, if you've ever stared at your heating bill and wondered, how do they actually justify these rates, or how do they track the folks who literally just can't pay? Well, you're in the perfect place. Let's get right into it. So, how do we measure the true cost of natural gas for everyday people? It sounds like a simple question, right? But for utility companies, accurately tracking and disclosing both the financial and the human cost of natural gas, it's a massive, complex balancing act. We're not just talking about the wholesale price of the commodity here. No, we're talking about a highly detailed framework that measures what everyday folks actually pay out of pocket and, crucially, what happens when they can't. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the Affordability Balancing Act. Second, calculating average retail rates. Third, measuring customer disconnections. Fourth, tracking 30-day reconnections. And finally, number 5, the external factors driving these trends.
Okay, let's kick things off with Part 1, the Affordability Balancing Act.
To really get this, we have to understand the daily tightrope walk that gas utilities perform. This is basically the foundational context for all the data we're going to look at. According to the SASB standard, gas utilities have to deliver safe, absolutely reliable energy, while somehow keeping bills affordable, maintaining trust with their regulators, and still earning an appropriate return for their shareholders. Talk about a tricky triangle, right? If a utility drops the ball on affordability, the guidelines actually point out that customers might just reduce their energy use entirely. Or they might jump ship for alternative energy sources, like combined heat and power for the big industrial users. So maintaining this balance, it isn't just a nice-to-have PR move, it is literally a critical business issue for the utility's survival.
Moving right along to Part 2, calculating average retail rates.
Now, what's super interesting here is how we translate that delicate balancing act into raw, standardized financial data. Like, how do we put an actual number on affordability? Well, diving straight into the standard, we hit metric IFGU 240A.1. This specific rule mandates the quantitative disclosure of average retail gas rates. But before a utility can report this accurately, they first have to define exactly what kind of gas service they're actually providing to the consumer. So, before we do the math, we've got to define what they're selling. The first category here is bundled gas. This is the traditional setup you're probably most familiar with at home. It basically means the utility is doing the whole shebang. They are providing all the services, from buying the gas on the wholesale market to transmission, storage, local distribution, right down to the final retail service.
But we have to distinguish that bundled model from what the guidelines call transportation services only. You see, in deregulated markets where they have customer choice programs, the utility might literally just be moving gas through its pipes for a fixed fee. The actual gas itself is being sold by an entirely different third-party supplier. The framework is strict here. Utilities absolutely must report the rates for these two distinctly different services separately.
Okay, so here's the crucial point. How do they actually calculate the rate? It's highly standardized. To get the average retail rate, utilities take the total revenue directly tied to the gas delivered, and they divide it by the total volume delivered. But wait, they don't use gallons or cubic feet. They measure this in MMBtu. That's million British thermal units. Doing it this way creates this perfect, uniform baseline, so investors and regulators can instantly compare apples to apples across the whole industry.
But utilities can't just slap one massive blended number on a report and call it a day. That would hide way too much detail. The framework requires them to chop up these MMBtu rates across specific customer categories: residential, commercial, industrial, and transportation only. This is absolutely crucial because it gives regulators and the public a super granular view of who is paying what. It basically prevents the scenario where everyday home consumers are secretly footing the bill for massive, large-scale industrial factories.
All right, that brings us to Part 3, measuring customer disconnections.
So what happens when those residential retail rates we just calculated become completely unaffordable? Well, this is where cold, hard financial data crashes into social reality. We're moving over to metric IFGU 240A.3, which forces utilities to look at the very real, very human element of a terminated gas line. Under this standard, utilities must explicitly disclose the total number of residential customer disconnections. And the definition they use here is incredibly specific. It is when the entity intentionally terminates a customer's access to gas. What's absolutely vital to understand here is that if a disconnection happens for a bunch of different reasons, it still has to be included in this count if non-payment or even underpayment was a contributing cause.
This specific metric ensures that the harsh reality of energy poverty can't just be swept under the rug using administrative loopholes.
Next up, Part 4, tracking 30-day reconnections.
You know, counting disconnections really is only half the story. The metric brilliantly contrasts the sheer volume of shutoffs against the percentage of those exact households that actually manage to get their gas turned back on quickly. It's such a powerful comparison. Think about it. A high disconnection rate might look terrible on paper, but if the 30-day reconnection rate is also super high, it tells us that the utility actually has effective intervention and assistance programs in place.
The standard puts a heavy focus on this specific 30-day window. It tracks reconnections that happen through 3 main pathways: paying the bill outright, setting up a new payment plan, or successfully getting enrolled in a bill assistance program. Utilities have to track this meticulously. In fact, the standard explicitly warns them, no double counting reconnections that might bleed over into the next reporting period. The whole goal is to provide a highly accurate snapshot of transient energy loss versus chronic energy loss.
And finally, Part 5, external factors driving trends.
Let's zoom out a bit and look at the broader context with metric IFGU 248.4. Look, gas utilities do not operate in a vacuum. The standard totally recognizes that affordability isn't always the utility's fault. They are required to discuss external factors, things way outside their direct control that cause significant changes in customer affordability. At a bare minimum, this means looking at the prevailing economic conditions of their specific territory. We're talking local poverty rates, employment numbers, median household income. It also includes geography, extreme climate or weather events, and shifts in regulations and public policy.
But they can't just list out these external factors and move on. No way. For every external influence they list, the utility must clearly describe its frequency, its magnitude, and the trend of its impact. Plus, they have to spell out the resulting business impacts. What are the risks? Things like a spike in customer non-payment, major reputational damage, or uncertainty around recovering their costs. But on the flip side, what are the opportunities? Interestingly enough, navigating these affordability challenges can actually present opportunities for utilities to make approved capital investments or even grow their customer base by designing much better public assistance programs.
So the next time you open up your gas bill, I want you to think about everything we've just covered. Think about how your local provider actually navigates this incredibly complex ecosystem. How are they balancing those precise MMBtu retail rates? How are they managing the very real social reality of residential disconnections? And how do they respond to these massive external economic pressures, all just to deliver the energy you rely on every single day? It really is a fascinating look at the true cost of power. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.